Hello everyone, I'm Mark. Sorry I couldn't manage to make it with you today. I would have loved to have been with you all and get a chance to discuss and answer questions and such like. I'm on holiday, sadly, bad timing. It's my son's birthday, so he requested to go around Edinburgh Castle, and that's where I am while you're all discussing this. But I'd love to stay in touch and find out what goes on and have discussions with you when I'm back from holiday. A little bit about me. So I am a professor of rural entrepreneurship at Scotland's Rural College, where I lead their Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre. I am a research lead for the IUCN's UK peatland programme, which owns and operates the Peatland Code. I was one of the original architects of that and sit on its executive board. I work across each of the UK governments, advising on issues linked to natural capital and ecosystem markets. I was recently an advisor to the Committee on Climate Change Land Use Report, and I work with the United Nations, each of the Rio Conventions, on these kinds of issues as well. So I'm just one of a large team, most of whom are going to be on the call in the meeting with you here today, who can answer your questions and tell you lots more about this. But they asked if I could just give you a bit of a rundown on why we're doing this and what we're planning and where we're at. So I think the context of this is that there's just been this explosion of interest in UK-based land-based carbon projects. So the corporate sector racing to offset, inset, be part of this net zero journey that we're all on. But a limited supply of validated, verified projects through the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, the UK's two national carbon markets. And that's led to a growing interest in the potential for soil carbon from regenerative agriculture. Now, the prize, if we can get this right, is that we create new revenue streams for farmers at a time, let's face it, when public sector funding for agriculture is gradually shrinking. And the potential to enable that broad-scale shift towards regenerative agriculture, where we're doing things on the farm that are good for the environment, in particular that store soil carbon. Perhaps it might be possible to pay for that from the corporate sector. Now, there's an existing landscape, so let me give you a kind of a sense of where we're at and why it is that we need a UK farm soil carbon code. So there are existing voluntary carbon markets for soil carbon. These are international methodologies by things like Verra, Gold Standard, etc. But the issue is that they're not well adapted to the context that we find ourselves here in the UK, in particular the size of land holdings that we have. And they're also not cost effective enough in terms of the processes you have to go through for validation and verification to create a viable market. And this was one of the reasons that we didn't try and adopt the Verra methodology for peatlands and created the Peatland Code. Now, anyone can, if they want, sell soil carbon from their farm already. All you need is a willing buyer and a seller. You create a contract, you do the work, and job done. So there is already a nascent market where brokers are employing third-party verifiers. So people like OF&G, Soil Association, others who go in and provide evidence that a farmer has indeed supplied the soil carbon benefits that they claimed they would, and that then leads to the generation of certificates. Now, the issue, though, is that these certificates don't count for a lot. You can't trade them, and there are really strong restrictions on what you are allowed to say or report as a company based on this kind of methodology. So the feedback we've had from the investment community is that a code is needed to provide market confidence if this market is really going to grow and expand to the extent that we think is potentially possible. In the meantime, while we're waiting to get this happening, there is the danger of a cowboy market, which could expose both investors and farmers to risks that we really don't want to see. And in the worst case scenario, end up discrediting and delegitimizing this market before it's even got off the ground. So, for example, farmers who inadvertently double or triple count and sell and resell carbon to multiple people. For example, do I know that I'm actually getting real new additional carbon when I invest in this stuff? Or investors clawing their money back when factors completely beyond the control of the farmer lead to non-delivery. So in the Peatland Code, the Woodland Carbon Code, there are pooled buffers that mean that a single project can fail and the commitment is still met by the buffer of unsold carbon from other projects in the scheme. So we need to make sure that we don't expose farmers to these risks or investors and give this whole market a bad name before it's ever really got going. So the purpose of the code is to provide this assurance, the guarantees that both investors and farmers need, that the carbon and the funding they receive is real and secure. And within these parameters, then we can responsibly grow this market. Now, progress so far on this has been funded by the Resilient Dairy Landscapes project that I'm leading with colleagues including Chris Rogers, Helen Kendall, Pippa Chapman, Guy Ziv, and pro bono contributions from a range of people, most of whom are with you today: Annie Leeson, Matthew Orman, Matt Hay, Helena Black, Robert Parkhurst, and George Hewson. We're working now with Jenny Phelps, who, like George Hewson, is from FWAG, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So where we are, we've started a review of international soil carbon standards, protocols, and codes. So we'll be finishing that work off. Still quite a lot of work to be done there. So what are these standards? How do they work? What are the advantages, the disadvantages? How applicable are they in a UK context? So that international comparative analysis is the first step. So we build on best practice. We don't reinvent the wheel where we can. The next step is to review on-farm soil carbon interventions. So we started that in our Resilient Dairy Landscapes project. We're now expanding that to a collaboration with AHDB even, to determine which of the myriad of different on-farm interventions are most reliably likely to sequester and store soil carbon over the long term. So huge issues around the evidence base for this, and the goal here is to do statistical meta-analysis across a range of high-quality published research studies. So it's not just we've got a couple of really good studies that say this works in a few different contexts. We're looking across the UK and where relevant to other comparable countries to say, on average, across all of these different contexts, does this work or not? Or is this actually a very mixed evidence base? The idea being then that we put in the most rigorous, most effective interventions into the first draft of the code. And of course, as new evidence becomes available, others can be added. That's exactly how we've built the Peatland Code. We have begun a small start on some farmer and investor interviews, much more to be done in that space, just to make sure that what we're doing does meet the needs of farmers and of investors. I was speaking to the National Farmers Union just a couple of weeks ago, and expressing some quite grave concerns about this in terms of what this might mean for tenants, for rental prices, etc. I'm sure that's a debate that you'll get into as part of this. So we build on international best practice then, based on our review of existing protocols, the evidence base from our meta-analysis and evidence synthesis, and draft a code. That goes out to consultation. We get some audit reports, but it's a public consultation. Anyone can comment. We digest, we revise, and we then publish a pilot code. And crucially, then, we pilot the code in selected farms, working with FWAG in Gloucestershire in the first instance, and other pilots to be identified. And so we then get feedback from that. How's this actually working on the ground? And we revise the code further in light of our pilot findings. And at that point, we are ready to launch. Now we can all have some debate about how long that might take. I think we're looking at a year to get to the place where we've got a pilot code with some feedback on how that is working. At least another 6 months, I would suggest, until you might be able to actually launch something. So I think we're looking into 2023. There's probably ways you could shortcut that if need be, but of course a lot of this depends on how fast you can move based on the evidence, and we want to take as rigorous an approach as possible. So I'm going to conclude and hand over to my colleagues to tell you more, but as you may have heard already, we have been very fortunate as a consortium led by Jenny Phelps from FWAG in winning funding from the Environment Agency's Investment Readiness Fund. But of course, this is just the start. There's so much more that we need to do. And I'm going to hand over to one of my colleagues to tell you a bit more about how you can help our crowdfunding campaign so that we can develop the most rigorous, well-tested and internationally recognized code possible that will enable soil carbon markets to be scaled across the UK. Now, sorry again, I couldn't be with you in person, but do please make sure that George Hewson has all of your questions, your contact details, and he'll make sure that you are kept informed of progress. My colleagues will be here to answer your questions now, and I will also answer any questions that can't be covered now when I'm back in the office. Enjoy the rest of the programme. Have a great day.